Night caller, Lena had always been a skeptic. A woman of logic, she dismissed the town's superstitions as mere folklore, stories meant to frighten children or entertain those with nothing better to do. That was until the night she moved into her new house on the edge of town. The house was old, worn with age, but it had a charm to it that called to her. It sat at the end of a long, winding road with trees that grew so close to the windows it felt like the forest itself was watching. The locals had warned her about the house, but Lena had brushed it off, thinking it was just another tale spun to keep people from venturing into the dark woods at night. The first few days were uneventful, a quiet routine settling in as Lena unpacked her belongings and began to make the house her own. But then one night, the phone rang. It was past midnight, and Lena had been lying in bed reading. The shrill sound of the phone broke the silence, making her heart skip. She reached for it reluctantly, her mind already racing with confusion. Who would call at this hour? Hello? She said, her voice thick with sleep. There was only silence on the other end. Then, a whisper, so faint she almost thought it was the wind. Help me. The voice was raspy, strained, as if the speaker had been calling for days, weeks, maybe even longer. The words chilled her to the bone. It didn't sound like a prank. It sounded desperate. Lena sat up, her throat tight. Who is this? She demanded, but the line was dead. She shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling that lingered in her chest. It was just a wrong number, she told herself. A glitch, nothing more. But then it happened again, the next night and the night after that. Each time, the voice came through, growing weaker, more panicked. The same words, help me. Lena tried to call the number back, but every time she dialed, the line rang twice before going dead. The voice never answered again. It was as though the call came from nowhere, dashed from a place beyond her reach. And then, one night, the voice spoke something different. Look outside. Lena froze, her heart pounding. Her room was bathed in moonlight, the trees outside swaying in the wind. For a moment, she thought it was another trick of the mind, but then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching at the window. Slowly, she turned her head. Her heart stopped. There, in the darkness beyond the glass, was a figure, a shape that didn't belong. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was a pale blur, its eyes wide and vacant. It was staring directly at her. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, falling from the bed as she scrambled to her feet. Her pulse raced, her mind refusing to accept what she was seeing. It couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light. But no matter how hard she tried to rationalize, the figure remained there, unmoving, watching. The scratching continued, louder now. Lena rushed to the door, pulling it open and bolting into the hallway. Her legs were shaking as she made her way down the stairs, but when she reached the front door and opened it, there was nothing there. The yard was empty, the trees still and silent. But then, she heard the voice again, soft but clear, right behind her. Help me. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. Her face was pale, her clothes ragged and torn, as though she had been trapped for years. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth moving soundlessly. Lena's body froze, paralyzed by the sight. The woman's lips formed the words again. Help me. And then, before Lena could speak, the woman took a step forward. Lena backed away, stumbling over the steps. Who are you? What do you want? She cried out. The woman did not respond. She moved closer, her movements slow and deliberate, her outstretched hand reaching for Lena. As the woman got closer, Lena's eyes widened in horror. She could see it now. The woman's eyes were hollow, empty sockets, black as the night. Her skin was stretched tight over a skeletal frame, as though she had been long dead. Lena turned and ran, tearing through the house, her feet pounding on the wooden floors. She rushed into the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter, the cold steel steadying her shaking hands. She swung around, expecting to see the woman there, but the house was silent. The phone rang again. Lena's heart stopped. She stared at the phone, its screen flickering in the dim light. Her hand reached out, trembling, and she picked up the receiver. Help me, the voice whispered. Lena's eyes went wide with realization. The woman from the doorway hadn't been real. The voice, it wasn't coming from a living person. It was something else, something trapped in the house, something that was calling to her. The walls creaked, the house groaning as though it was alive. And then, from the corners of her vision, she saw it. Movement. Shadows shifting in the darkness, figures emerging from the walls, their faces twisted and broken, their eyes hollow and black. The phone line buzzed. Lena dropped the receiver, and the shadows crept closer. Each figure was closer than the last, moving with an unnatural speed, their forms bending and distorting. Then, from somewhere in the depths of the house, she heard the faintest sound, a whisper. Help me. It was no longer a voice from the phone. It was everywhere. The walls, the air, the shadows themselves seemed to cry out in pain. Lena's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, her mind unraveling. She couldn't escape. She couldn't run. The house had claimed her. It was the house that had called, the house that had waited for her. And now it would never let her leave. The last thing Lena heard before everything went silent was the voice. Help me. And then there was nothing.